Good evening, my friends. This is Paul, and I am here to be telling you about the ISTP Myers-Briggs type. Unlike previous Myers-Briggs videos that I've done, this one is going to be pretty much fresh on my mind because I actually spoke with an ISTP just about an hour before I made this video to make sure that the information I was conveying was correct for the most part, and his response was rather interesting. He said, "You're kinda right, but a lot of what you're saying is also very situational." So I think that can also apply to the ISTP in general. Because they're perceiving types, they're not going to want to think in a very structured way. In fact, they might not even describe themselves as structured as far as like their moods and whatnot. There could be a day where an ISTP just feels like being emotional, and there could be a day when they don't. Those days don't come very often, but they could. So, first off, despite the fact that I am an ISTJ and I share 3 letters in common with the ISTP, we actually share no functions in common whatsoever. Even though we value introversion, sensing, and thinking, we approach them differently as far as the introversion, extroversion. So for him, if he has introverted thinking, I'm going to have extroverted thinking. He has extroverted feeling, I have introverted feeling. You kind of get the idea by now. Besides, Carl Jung didn't even originally intend for the J's and the P's to be part of the system. It was only added later to make a placeholder for the functions. Because by his system, ISTs could have completely different sets of functions and you wouldn't be able to tell them apart. So they added in the P's to say, okay, these are for the dominant introverted thinkers, and the J's will put this for the dominant introverted sensors. I know it's a confusing system, but an easy way to remember it is that IPs will always lead with either thinking or feeling, and it'll be introverted. IJs always lead with a perceiving function, either sensing or intuition, and it's always introverted. So ISTPs are kind of hard to describe because it's really hard for me to imagine a judging function that is introverted. ISTPs typically have a very strong grasp of like their own subjective way in which the world works, but they don't always like talking about it. In fact, a lot of times my ISTP friend, whenever he's in a discussion, he typically tries to make his responses as short as possible, and if he can, he'll try to avoid answering at all. Typically, he's the one that kind of just listens to what everyone else has to say. Then when you ask him for his input, sometimes he might just say like, well, I think this, and he'll sum it up in one sentence, or, I'd rather not say anything right now. Because they're introverted thinkers. For them, they're talkative in their mind. They're going to want to figure out what is their truth. Yes, they're more likely to slip into postmodernism than an ISTJ, and they're also less likely to put stock in authority and traditions. Again, introverted thinking. It's all about this subjective reasoning for how they think that things should be, based on their own experiences. And that's where the extroverted sensing comes in, is that hand-on, tangible reality that they're picking up, and then that sort of forms the basis of their actions through logic. As a result, they aren't as likely to be harsh on someone for breaking the rules, but more so if they didn't think something through enough. You might see me saying, "Ugh, what a disgrace to society you are. How dare you break that law?" Where they're likely to be like, well, that law's not really going to kill you. I mean, as long as you keep your neck alive, you should be fine. ISTPs, like pretty much every dominant thinking type, have slight edges in their voices. Well, every thinking type in general has an edge, kind of. But ISTPs, while they can be harsh, as my friend explained to me, they have a deep, caring side, very, very, very deep down inside, that when it comes out can actually be surprisingly effective. That's why I'm calling this video The Secret Admirers, because ISTPs, they don't like showing overt displays of affection. They can be really good at reading people, but I've also heard that there's the opposite extreme where An ISTP can also be extremely socially oblivious, and so as a result, they can often be extremely straightforward without necessarily thinking of the consequences of that. But they can also use that to their advantage when... Let me use my brother as an example. He's an ISTP that kind of borders on ESTP at times, and he loves messing with my little sister. And he knows that certain things are going to make her uncomfortable. Yet whenever I point out to him, you're making her uncomfortable, he's just like, so? She can handle it. And that's kind of how you would describe an ISTP's extroverted feeling, briefly, is whatever, not like I care. Not to say that they're uncaring. A couple of examples I know of in personal experience of ISTPs are like my brother. He just goes all out in buying Christmas presents for the family. The ISTP that I fact-checked this with wondered if perhaps that was more of a feelsy type of affirmation thing, but then I reminded him that, well, he is borderline ESTP, so that might be the tertiary feeling coming out. But my particular friend in mind, he will always buy me an apple juice every time we go out to Bigby. And usually when I thank him for it, it doesn't seem like it means anything. Like, he kind of just is like, okay, cool. And then kind of walks away, or he'll be like, you're welcome, and then leave it at that. Typically, ISTPs don't enjoy physical affection, but they're not nearly as stuffy as an ISTJ is, because they're extroverted feelers. But because it's inferior, they're likely going to be very reluctant in showing physical affection. Like, they might go, if they do hug someone, or they'll be like, willingly offer a handshake, make it quick, and leave it at that. They won't want it to be too touchy-feely. Another thing that kind of confused my friend was when I asked him, how do ISTPs use their introverted intuition? He sort of seemed to think that intuition was nearly non-existent in their types. But when I described what I had heard from an ISFP friend of mine, he seemed like it kind of made sense but kind of didn't. I guess that shows how underdeveloped his intuition is. But basically, ISTPs use their tertiary introverted intuition to help them make sense of what they've been thinking and what they've been hearing in order to make it appear cohesive to the audience. And that's the downfall that the INFJs and the ENFJs fall into, is because their introverted intuition comes before their thinking. So whereas they're going to have all these crazy possibilities and then it's going to come out all scattered and weird, ISTPs are going to have these super amazing thought out sentences and present them clearly and multi-directional, because their introverted intuition is going to make sure that it's conveyed. However, they're typically not very good at entertaining futuristic stuff and what ifs. They prefer to be in the moment. They don't really like abstract stuff. They can get hidden meaning behind like a joke or a sentence, hence why ISTPs typically have this really weird sort of dark humor to them. But they're not going to make it a priority. Like, you're hardly ever going to see an ISTP that talks about existential crises or like, hey guys, so what's your opinion on the new order of the world, or however those INTPs talk. That gives me a headache. In fact, they're not really likely to share their opinions at all. They're not very good debaters, which is kind of a shock considering that INTPs they like to think that they're terrific debaters. ISTPs are typically okay with knowing that something is true, and they don't necessarily need to share it. My brother is a perfect example of this. He's Catholic like me, but unlike me, where I'm like, making all these videos about it and talking to you guys, he's just like, I know what I believe, and I constantly question it, but I don't see the need to preach it, nor do I know how. And I guess that would explain why ISTPs don't often like piping up in a small group discussion. They don't need to, and they don't feel the need to be compelled to present their ideas. If anything, they're compelled to act with their hands. That's why you see a lot of ISTPs in carpentry or mechanic positions, and I have yet to know of an ISTP that doesn't have some kind of interest in cars. They love anything that's hands-on. They typically don't like spending too much time looking at a manual, but instead they're very good at... stupid computer. My old computer used to only do this for 15 minutes. Anyway, sidetracked. ISTPs are really good at what my mom's best friend calls eyeballing a situation. They're really good at like feeling something, examining something with a flashlight and saying, "Oh, yeah, I see the problem here." And then with their introverted intuition, if it's properly developed, they can explain it in such a way that anyone can say, "I get exactly what you're trying to say." ISTPs, unlike the ESTJs and the ENTJs, have inferior feeling, but because it's extroverted, they're not so much likely to be apprehensive about letting their personal feelings get in the way of their decisions, as they don't like it when overt displays of emotion are used at the inopportune times. Like, they're likely going to feel uncomfortable if someone bursts out crying when there's no need to be crying. They're likely to say, okay. Cry later. We got an urgent thing to do." If you've ever watched Star Wars The Force Awakens, Han Solo, who is an ESTP, and in real life, actor Harrison Ford is an ISTP, he says, "Escape first, hug later." ISTPs are typically pretty good at prioritizing a situation, and they believe that there's a time and a place for emotions. Even if they're not very comfortable expressing them, they can be very good consolers if they've developed their feeling enough. In fact, I know of a lot of ISTPs that make for very good counselors, but unlike the ENFJ, which is their opposite type, their advice is not going to be on the warm and fuzzy side. They're going to be more of just the well, you kind of screwed up there, so you better make amends for your mistakes. Now, as I'm speaking this, I'm sort of seeing a lot of similarities between myself and the ISTP, but allow me to point out just a couple of differences first, and then you can take it from there. First off, my type is way more structured than they are due to having extroverted thinking as our secondary preference, making us all about timetables and rules and regulations. Because they have introverted thinking, they're not going to care. Also, my type is better at keeping their promises and getting things done punctually, whereas ISTPs are typically kind of terrible at punctuation. We also have a slightly better memory than them, but they're better at learning things hands-on. They typically prefer to learn things by doing as opposed to by learning. Also, ISTPs are likely to be slightly more rude. When they're talking, not that ISTJs can't be, but they're typically considerably more holding back as far as their anger or judgments than an ISTP would. Although, unlike the ESTJs and the ENTJs, ISTPs aren't exactly known for being confrontational. Sure, they'll tell someone when they're wrong, and they often do it very rudely and have to apologize later. But they're not just going to start freaking out because someone's a jerk. They might just say, "What an absolute idiot you're being." And that might be the extent of their anger. So, in short, one of the things I admire about ISTPs is I like how they're really good at summarizing a sentence. They're really good at saying things straightforward, never confusing. They really know how to get under your skin, but deep down inside, they also really know how to care. Their weaknesses can definitely be when it comes to scheduling, but they typically give it their all to have the best of times, as long as you don't overtalk them. And that's a good rule to have with most ISTPs in general, so I've noticed. Just don't go overboard with anything, and they'll be fine. Everything has a time and a place for them. And as long as you're able to maintain that proper balance of when and where you should say things, you should be good to go. Anywho, that's all I really have to say because I don't have enough experience with their types. Because my brother, being the extroverted sensor that he is typically out and about, so I don't really know what's going through his head most of the time. But if you have any questions, I'll try my best to answer them, and I'll even hopefully get my friend to help back me up too. So, until the next time I make one of these videos, keep the faith, stay epic, and God bless. Bye.